Hey guys, Anthony here. So I was taking some show notes. Well, I was planning on doing a live stream because I have way too much stuff to talk about to make dedicated videos about and whatever, but I don't know. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning now, and I figured I'd just make this video about one thing that was on my mind. So I'm going to read this article from the Epoch Times called "Why is Communism Evil?" I'll put it right here. I don't know if I'll have you guys follow along because that's like more editing work to do or whatever. But the link will be in the description and all that stuff. So I'm going to read it to you guys. This was from December 20th, 2018, and updated, I guess, a week later on January 2nd, 2019. So, communism is not evil because the estimated 85 million to 100 million deaths caused by Marxist-Leninist regimens. Communism is not evil because of the gulags, blah, blah, blah. Communism is not evil because of this and that. Communism is not evil because of mass propagandizing of hundreds of millions of children in the former Soviet bloc, China, Cuba, North Korea, and Vietnam. It's not because of the massive corruption endemic in every communist country. It's not because of blah, blah, blah. All of the above are appalling beyond measure, but they are symptoms, not the cause of the inherent evil of communism. The reason that communism is the greatest evil is simple. Communism is the greatest enemy of personal responsibility ever invented. Communism waters down and diminishes personal accomplishments. Once one sees this clearly, simply or seemingly inexplicable communist-driven policies make sense. Every communist policy, from the minimum wage to single-payer healthcare to rent control, is designed to minimize and thwart personal responsibility. Conversely, individuals who take personal responsibility become leaders, inspiring others to take control of their own lives. Individuals who take personal responsibility for their actions are accountable for their behavior, which result in better relationships with others. The positive effects of greater personal responsibility are evident in the United States. Every wonderful invention, every great work of art, every new medical innovation, every highway, health-creating new business, and every amazing sporting achievement was driven by innovative and entrepreneurial individuals. That's like free market capitalism, pretty much. People who successfully battled alcoholism or drug addiction must have at some point taken personal responsibility for their conditions. Personal responsibility is evident in the individual whose thriving company provides others with a livelihood, or an athlete who trains relentlessly to win the championship, or the student who goes above and beyond what is required to achieve scholarship. These are the people who lead society to greater achievement and to better lives. Personal responsibility is the ultimate manifestation of free will. I'm going to give my thoughts after I'm done reading this. But yeah, just keep following along. Without freedom, there can be no personal responsibility. Without personal responsibility, there can be no individual or social progress. The degree of freedom existing in any given society will determine the potential for increased personal responsibility and social progress. No one can be forced to be responsible. It is an individual's choice alone. Freedom creates the conditions for progress. Personal responsibility is the engine that turns potential into reality. Greater personal responsibility is the path to more abundance, greater choice, and more purposeful and productive life. The opposite of personal responsibility. Shunning personal responsibility leads to poverty, enslavement, and the fundamental opposite of good, evil. So, for example, not taking personal responsibility for sexual urges and having children, and not taking personal responsibility for using condoms, which can create children that you can't financially take care of, and also spread STDs. Just an example. Few, if any, people directly choose evil, but refusing to take responsibility for their lives. They are drawn through an escalating series of compromises and evasions into an almost inescapable trap. Ordinarily weak people may eventually become criminals. In an organized socialist society, they may even become monsters. With low levels of personal responsibility, the slide towards evil is inevitable. Communism's central dictum is from each according to his ability to each according to his need. With greater attack on personal responsibility could one simply conceive? What greater attack on personal responsibility could one possibly conceive? Responsibility implies control. One cannot be held responsible for what one does not control. Driving a vehicle or paying the mortgage or saving for one's future are all examples of individuals taking control of their lives. And this is a great thing about Stefan Molyneux when he talks about picking your future partner, pick the person that you want to be the mother of your children, is one thing that he says and stuff. But if people are obligated to force to give the fruits of their labor to others who have failed to produce, their incentive to produce is weakened. Conversely, if people are given a right to the fruits and labors of others, how does that impact personal responsibility? Like, why would you be responsible if people are just going to give you things anyway? And why would you produce if it's just going to be taken away from you? I've talked about this before on the channel with my Prog Pow argument for taking hash power away from in Ethereum, taking hash power away from ASIC miners, capitalistic ASIC miners, and giving them to GPUs through changing the Ethereum algorithm. Personal charity versus state-mandated redistribution of wealth. Genuine private charity is the potential to help two parties. Done correctly, a better-off person can interact with someone less fortunate to the benefit of both. Some of the experience and wisdom gained by one person can be shared with another. That's a human benevolence. It blossoms in a free environment. It's a good thing. Communism's forced redistribution of wealth, however, leads to corruption and decay. In such a system, the provider of wealth becomes a slave to the forces beyond his control. He naturally resents working for faceless others. He has no personal relationship to the beneficiaries, the people who are getting his money through taxes or whatever, just forcibly taking money that he's earned to give to the less fortunate, and is stripped of his ability to see his wealth put into good use for the benefit of others. He is robbed of experiencing gratitude for his charity. He experiences none of the joys of giving. He loses his incentive to strive to give to others, potentially becoming bitter and resentful. So that's one reason that I like helping people and doing it by my own accord, because I get to make the decisions of how I can help them and what is of more use, the most use to them. And people who appreciate me for the time that I take to help them and everything makes me feel good about myself and makes me feel good about helping someone else, and without being face to face with that person, I don't get the satisfaction of doing that. So there's no positive interaction for me having my money forcibly taken away to give to someone else. The beneficiary, where we leave off. The middleman would be the bureaucrat who spends his time robbing and persecuting those he resents, the rich, to give to those whose favor he seeks to curry the votes he seeks to buy. The redistribution of wealth is a cycle of contempt, a cycle that fosters corruption and breeds hatred, jealousy, and resentment. It's dehumanizing and it weakens the human soul. It is the gateway to mass evil. At one time in the United States, the corrosive influence of government dependency was so understood among the populace that even Franklin D. Roosevelt felt compelled to address it in his 1935 State of the Union address. The lessons of history, confirmed by the evidence immediately before me, show conclusively that continued dependence upon relief induces a spiritual disintegration fundamentally destructive to the national fiber. The goal of our relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. It is inimical to the dictates of a sound policy. It is in violation of the traditions of America. Work must be found for able-bodied but destitute workers. The federal government must and shall quit this business of relief. So why is communism evil? because communism, socialism, and all the collectivist philosophies despise the individual, the smallest and most important unit of humanity. Correction, the individual is humanity. In a free society where everyone is perceived as being solely responsible for his or own life, where each life is sacred, crimes such as those experienced in the 20th century communism or the human rights abuses such as those experienced in the communist countries are inconceivable. Only when people are perceived as slaves to the state, to be exploited and coddled according to the bureaucratic whim, does the door open to mass terror and degradation. Communism never died. Communism is not primarily a political force. Communism is the manifestation of a deep psychological and spiritual weakness in human nature, seething in envy. The desire for communism, i.e., the need to be shielded from one's own failings, lives in the dark side of every individual. This dark side of human nature is as old as humanity, which is why those who thought they saw the end of communism after the fall of the Berlin Wall were sadly mistaken. Communism never failed. In fact, it was and continues to be wildly successful. Communists now rule several major nations, China, Cuba, Vietnam, and North Korea, and are hugely influential in Russia, most of Latin America, all of Africa, and much of Europe. And the insidious beast has made a great headway in the U.S. federal government, in popular culture, and on college campuses across the United States. So one thing that I talked about with this is funding women to do better in college, taking funding away. I'm not going to get into that here. Communism state, but there's a lot of that. There's welfare state and all the stuff that happens in the United States. Communism's stated goal, the redistribution of wealth, was simply designed to seduce the weak to sacrifice their freedom for the ultimate benefit of a few. The actual goal of communism is global domination, which would in turn create the greatest, most comprehensive tyranny of all time. The newest manifestation of communism would not only feature murderous dictators reminiscent of the old Soviet Union, but would now be coupled with highly efficient surveillance technology, making any form of escape impossible. If this latest iteration of communism succeeds, it will only be because too many individuals are willing to give up personal responsibility for an illusionary sense of security. The best anti-communist is the fully self-responsible individual. The only true antidote to communism is personal responsibility. So I read that the other day, and I wrote some thoughts on it. So let me get a refresher in my brain, and I'll come back. So I'm just going to read off my notes here. They don't particularly make sense because they're just like notes. But so one way that I thought to get rid of communism is with dating and associating with responsible people. Because so if you only hang out with responsible people, then that's going to be and you ostracize everyone who's not responsible. You don't associate with them. Ostracism is death. You can think of like being ostracized from your tribe because you don't share the same values as them, or you separated from them. Well, then you're going to be left alone and to fend for yourself and everything. So if you ostracize the behavior you don't want to see in the world, then the more people that do that, then the more we get rid of that behavior. I think this is the same as with like preventing disease. If we think that the reason we're turned off from people with poor hygiene, so people with bad breath, body odor, overweight, etc., it's to make sure that our offspring have the best chance of surviving. So you don't want to date people that have bad breath or body odor or bad hygiene. I think because you're like triggered in your head saying like, oh, this person has bad hygiene, so they're gonna like, what if they, because of their bad hygiene, get sick, get a virus, and then they're not able to take care of our children, and then also they'll pass these behaviors on to our children as well. So then now our children has bad hygiene as well. So you don't want to mate, and you don't want to mate with an obese person because the chance your child will have health and life problems preventing your genes from moving on is greater. So if you date like an obese person, and then the obese genes transfer onto your children, well, then your child is going to have problems like being made fun of in school, being picked on, bullied, health risks being associated with being overweight, like heart problems. The heart has to work harder, knee and joint pain from having to move around the weight, mobility issues, all that stuff. So being attracted to someone with good hygiene or someone that is obese gets rid of those behaviors from the gene pool. So that's why I was thinking, like, if you date someone who's responsible and look for people who are responsible and have your virtues in mind, then that'll get rid of that from the gene pool. So I also wrote, dating someone who doesn't practice personal responsibility will also pass that on to your children, unless you actively spend time to combat it. So whenever your spouse says like something that's irresponsible or does something irresponsible, then you have to go to your kid and explain why that's wrong, and what'll happen if you continue doing this and that and whatever. And that puts you at war with your spouse. Because you have to combat their bad behavior instead of you two working as a team. So that's just stressful and time consuming, which is not something you want to bring into your relationships. The more time that you spend combating your spouse, the less time you have to earn money or teach your children, answer children's questions and guide them and play with them, and just to relax and enjoy each other. So you can also do this with other values too. So selectively picking your partner, not just for responsibility, your hygiene, or obesity, but you can also choose a partner who's honest, virtuous, argues fairly, doesn't hit or raise their voice or throw tantrums. And they also show like ability to discuss and find solutions to problems that you guys have. All right, so that's the end of this video. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Links in the description. Donate Bitcoin or Ethereum if you want. It helps a lot, just I don't think people are really going to be doing that. We'll have more videos in the future, definitely. All right, take care. Thank you, and goodbye.